Big thanks to our sponsors who make the pudding possible. The American Camp Association of Illinois is made up of nearly 289,000 members, volunteers, campers, families, and professionals who believe in the power of camp. They work to disrupt the effects of poverty by providing fundamental services for children and families and learning opportunities for camp professionals. Learn more about ACA Illinois by visiting acail.org. You know the impact you want to make in a child's life, but figuring out the day-to-day details can be overwhelming. Let Camptivities help you make that impact by streamlining the creation of your camp activity schedules. Schedule a demo at camptivities.com.
Welcome to the pudding.
The sweet proof of research to back up what you already know about summer camp. Hi, I'm Dr. Mandi Baker. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Travis Allison. My pronouns are he, him.
Today, we have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Barry Garst. He is a youth development and leadership professor in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management at Clemson University. Hello, Barry. Welcome. Lovely to see you.
Hi, Mandi. Hi, Travis. Great to be with you today.
Thanks for joining us.
Well, we're excited to have you here because there's so much cool stuff that you are doing and have done in the world of camp research. But to get us in the right mind frame to understand who you are, can you tell us how you became a researcher? How did you end up doing camp research?
You know, it's funny, in thinking about that question, I can't help but sort of feel like I didn't really seek to become a camp researcher. I just sort of evolved into what felt like that's where I was expected to be, right? That's where I was supposed to be. And I kind of believe that. And we have this path. And sometimes we actually get lucky enough to find the path, right? And actually end up on it. You know, I've spent a lot of time in camp. Camper, CIT, counselor, adult volunteer, director, alumni, parents of campers, now parents of staff. And so, I don't know, right? It was such an important part of my life. And like a lot of researchers, graduate study often plays a role. And for me, it did. I was at Arizona State University for my master's degree, and actually not studying camp, but studying how to collect good data and how to collect data across multiple sites and how to collect data from multiple populations, like kids and parents and staff, et cetera. And all of that stuff sort of started to come together. And so after I finished that master's degree, I was a camp director. And then it became, well, how do I collect evidence for my programs? And that was something that I came to understand quickly, both as a researcher and a practitioner, that I needed to have the evidence. So I was interested in that, right? So that interest to better understand what I was doing really drove that significantly. It pushed me to be interested in getting that PhD. It pushed me to continue to focus my areas of research. And it just naturally ended up being around camp. So I think it's a combination of recognizing that camp is transformative and just having a lot of personal curiosity around that experience, right?
When you got into this PhD, what, hit the head on that nail of actually, I want to keep doing this research stuff. I'm not going to go back into practice. I'm going to keep doing this thing.
Yeah. So I spent a few years doing outdoor behavioral healthcare, and that was really intensive work. And that actually led me into directing camp. And so by the time I got to a point where I wanted to do more of an academic path, I had been in pretty intensive, certainly residential environments. The camp I directed was serving more than 400 kids a week. So a really big operation. So I guess I think at that point, I decided that given that sort of burgeoning interest in research, as well as feeling like I had contributed quite a bit as a practitioner, that it was a natural transition to continue down that academic path. Yeah.
Barry, did you have an experience as a child or a young adult at camp that really aligns with the way you think about your research now? Was there something then that happened that now you can look back and see aligns with the way you think about the research you do?
Yeah, I can remember experimenting with my identity at camp, experimenting with who I wanted to be. And that could be as simple as, am I going to tell more jokes? Am I going to be more serious? Am I going to be less serious? Am I going to try to develop relationships with people in a different way, right, than maybe I would at school? And so that certainly was true for me. We know that research tells us it's true for young people, that they experiment with their identity when they're in new situations, when they're away from home. And that's fantastic, right? That's one of the elements of the camp experience. It's so transformative. So that certainly resonated with me. And then when you start to see data, your own data, and findings from other studies supporting that. It's certainly validating. It certainly links up the human experience, right, with what research tells us. So
I
Very
I have
cool.
a quick follow-up to that. I
Mm.
think about that idea of trying on identities at camp, and I think about when I sort of consciously decided to try on a camp identity based on someone that I looked up to at camp. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that he was also trying on an identity at that point. I mean, he probably was 19 or 20 years old. And I looked up to him because I was 14 or 15 years old. And
yeah,
to realize that as an adult, he was probably in the same position that I hit 3 years later. And I was like, I'm going to be just like Scott.
Does
you're
Scott know that you want to be just like Scott?
Yeah,
Okay.
he does. Yeah.
Very
when
well.
you're creating this sort of identity ladder, right, where
Mm.
each
So
role,
true. Yeah.
right, each role, each generation, both influencing each other. We're all modeling off of each other, social learning. Oh, that's just really neat.
I know you and I have nerded out a few times, Barry. We've had the opportunity on the back of buses and that kind of thing to talk about huge ideas. One of them, I think, has to do with this identity ladder we've talked about, is that there's something very unique about the social constructs, expectations, and narratives of camp. That means that there's that campy identity available. There is kind of, let's say maybe there's borderlines to what that is and gives people an idea. And I think, being able to try out a camp identity where weird and silly and unique and odd all have a place that is celebrated and have a place that is sort of, there's space, but there's also celebration for it. Have you ever stumbled across any of those kinds of ideas in your work? Have you pursued any of that kind of stuff?
Well, I would add, and everything you said, I
Mm.
couldn't agree more with, but also we're doing it in a setting in which peers and staff are supporting that exploration and affirming however it is that we're
Yeah.
expressing ourselves and whatever strengths we might be bringing to the table. Those themes have come through in my research in the past.
Mm.
Those themes come through when we think about transitions, which of course, Mandi, you and I have talked a lot about, right?
Yeah.
And transitions are the idea of a transition is so foundational to human development, so foundational to child development. They're experiencing these transitions, they're trying to navigate the transitions. And I think we might say that a number of the challenges we see young people facing now is because they're trying to grapple with those transitions, right? And doing it in a safe way, doing it in a successful way. And I think that's a hard process, right? So I do think that there's a lot to be learned from how young people can be successful in those transitions within the camp experience, or how the camp experience supports those transitions. We have a lot of interest in understanding not just what happens on the ground in the summer, but what's that longer term impact on a young person's development, on their choices, on their relationships. And there's so much more that we have to learn around those themes.
And I think that that's often been the focus of camp research in the past is always a bit of a heavy emphasis on benefits and outcomes. But the question's often been, what are the benefit and outcomes either on site while it's happening or like immediately after? And this question of what is the legacy of camp in a person's life over decades and over the way they think. And look, there's a bit of research, but I think more than anything, we hear incredible anecdotes, just people telling their stories, their life stories, and they can pull out these moments of that really had an impact on me. I wanted to be Scott. And what does that mean? A few decades later, let's not count too many numbers, but what that's obviously stuck with you, Travis, because it was significant and it's in your head and it's a conversation you probably still have in your head. I wonder how many people want to be Travis when they grow up. I'm still in that camp, by the way. I want to be Travis when I grow up. Barry, can you tell us a bit more about what kind of projects you're working on at the moment? What research are you doing? And we'll then dig into some more specific.
Well, I will. I also want to sort of circle back to what you just said. We've done some work, myself with Dr. Anya Whittington, Dr. Ryan Gagnon, in looking at alumni data and what they say about their camp experience, how it influenced their career choice, how it influenced their college success. And, there've been a few other studies as well. So, we've got some data, we've got some really strong studies, but I completely agree with you. We need to have some longer term, large sample studies that can really help us understand that impact over time.
Hey, listeners, if you're out there, what we just said is we need the money. these big
all
studies.
the funders that are
All the funders. Yeah. If you know somebody, so when Barry's talking about large or scaled studies, and when we also talk about long-term and longitudinal studies, these take a lot of work and time, and by consequence, they cost more. As one of the between the amount of work that goes in and the amount of money that goes in is one of the reasons why they don't get done that often. So, hey, listeners, got a spare $500,000 in your back pocket? We'd love to do a longitudinal study, life story narrative style. We could go real beautiful, rich stuff. Anyways, Barry, you were headed somewhere else. You're going to tell us some more. Tell us what you're working on.
So, I've been doing research. I actually went back and looked. I've been doing research in camps specifically for 21 years. And
I thought it would be over the 20 mark.
Yeah,
I think about that. Added that up.
I think about the path that started focusing on youth outcomes, staff outcomes, that transitioned into understanding programmatically, operationally, what can we do to make those outcomes more likely to happen. We and others have called this sort of the antecedents of change, right? If change are the outcomes, what are those things that lead to change, and some work in that area. I've always been sort of a generalist as opposed to a specialist. And you and I were talking earlier about, there's often a focus, a push to sort of specialize, and I've been more of a generalist. So that early interest in outcomes and sort of program factors really driven by my experience as a director and trying to understand and tease some of that apart, then became a focus, particularly when I worked with the American Camp Association in research and business development, really became a focus on what's impacting the industry. What are the pain points of camp directors?
Yeah.
How are they spending their time? And we did some research back then looking at those emerging issues, right? And so emerging issues, it's not going to surprise anybody watching this. Parent communication, developing relationships with parents, staff training, retention, those are, medication management, healthcare. And that doesn't surprise us. So a lot of the work that I was doing started to shift. And I was studying then parent anxiety, overparenting, communication processes with parents. We started to look at other emerging issues related to safety, related to injury and illness prevention, even things like the role of camps in reducing summer learning loss, the role of camps in addressing food insecurity, really critical issues, not just for directors, but for young people. And, we have to accept the fact that camps don't own summer, but we have an important responsibility for summer.
Yeah.
Right? For saying we know what happens to young people in summertime, and we have to use that to help humanity. Right? And so that means we come out of the academic year and young people are experiencing all these things in the summer, sometimes developmentally appropriate and developmentally healthy, developmentally supportive, and sometimes not. Right? And how do we understand what that looks like and the camp community's role in that? And of course, a lot of camps embrace that role. They recognize that and they try to resource that. And that's always the question, right? The resources. And how then does that influence public policy? Right? How does it influence other decisions that are being made in other systems, right? So we can help young people thrive. But, I've been so fortunate. When I was with the American Camp Association, I had the opportunity to lead the 5-year Healthy Camp Study. And that was from 2006 through 2010. And that was incredibly beneficial to sort of finally have some good data around the actual injury and illness rates in day and resident camps. That also exposed me to partners with what was known then as the Association for Camp Nursing, Linda Ursig, Tracy Gaslin. So not just working for ACA, but also better understanding this other dimension of our field. And so that actually turned into a number of years ago, I started to volunteer with the Alliance for Camp Health as the chair of their research committee and helping to support their research efforts. So a lot of the work more recently has focused on camp healthcare related issues, everything from supporting mental, emotional, social health of campers and staff to new projects related to tick education and the prevention of tick-borne illness. So a number of other projects, but it's been really incredibly gratifying, right? To be able to sort of focus on what I was experiencing as a director, then to think about these critical and emerging issues within the camp industry, and then maybe some specialized work then really focused on camp healthcare.
I think this is an important moment to stop, and Barry's going to be humble because he always is. And he calls himself a generalist and not a specialist. And I would say his starting off as generals became a specialist in multiple domains rather than just one. So I do want to acknowledge some of the hats that you do wear, including your role with the Alliance for Camp Health. I mean, that's a significant hat. We're going to talk about a few other roles that you play. For those who are listening, Barry is at the pointy end of the game. He's actually achieved quite a number of expert positions and recognition. And despite his humility, I'm going to toot his horn and say you've done amazing work in being in that thought leadership in multiple domains of camp research. So take the compliment, Barry.
I appreciate that. That means a lot, incredibly so. It's also the case that we've all pulled ourselves along, right? The camp research community has really flourished.
Yeah.
And it's been boosted by practitioners that have gotten really excited about research, excited about evidence, and excited about program quality. And we've all sort of enriched each other in this space, right?
Beautiful, scrappy bunch too. So where there wasn't research or where there was concern between amazing practitioners and researchers, we've kind of had to create things that we wanted to see. It just wasn't sitting there for us in the way that sometimes research funds and opportunities often are. We're usually, we're scrappy, and we're also good at making scrapwork quilts. We pull pieces together and go, okay, we want to do this thing. These 5 pieces, we'll just give it a try.
And it's neat to see how others working in similar contexts, whether we say out of school time, whether we say community-based programs, whether we say nature-based programs, right? There's a lot of coming together of communities around this. Yeah. And I think there was a time in which where the camp research community was more siloed. I think we're less siloed now because there's acknowledgement across these different dimensions of our work in which people are coming together. And one of those areas is around research and around the kind of evidence we need to be collecting to support young people. So that's pretty gratifying too. And all of that helps us be successful, right?
Yeah.
Barry, I wanted to check in on your work on camp and digital empathy. What was the motivation for getting that started? I think that a lot of us would agree that digital empathy is incredibly important, becoming more so and more noticed. What got you facing that direction?
Maybe explain what digital empathy is, because I needed someone to break it down. I needed Barry. I was like, Barry, what is this?
Well, I'll address both those questions. And
Please.
Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about digital empathy and the MyView tool. Well, let's talk about what was happening before we were talking about that project and that work. We knew that rates of mental, emotional, and social health challenges among young people, among young adults, were increasing. We were either in the midst of the pandemic or coming out of the pandemic. And so we had significant disruptions on young people's lives, on their support systems. So kind of within that environment in which the Alliance for Camp Health, and this is sort of wearing that Alliance for Camp Health hat, the Alliance for Camp Health recognized that more supports were needed. We needed to better understand what was actually happening with young people. And we know that parents and guardians are asked to complete a health history form and other types of documentation before their child enters camp. We also know or suspect that we don't always get 100% accurate information. Sometimes it has to do with not understanding their medication, maybe. Maybe it has to do not understanding their behavioral triggers, their behavioral challenges, the supports we can provide. Often, we don't hear from the young person. We don't hear from the camper, their perspective. So, that's the context. And so the Alliance for Camp Health formed a relationship with an organization called Ticket Health to create the MyView tool. And MyView is a version of a tool that had been used in some other use settings, for example, schools, to collect data from young people. And it kind of recognizes that if I just go up to a camper and I start asking about their worries, if I start talking about their hopes, they might not be interested in sharing with me in that moment. If I put a survey in front of them, they may not be interested in completing that. If I even push an online survey to them, again, right, these are not the spaces necessarily in which a young person wants to share about themselves. So what's interesting is that Ticket Health worked with youth to develop and test and ultimately launch the tool that we adopted for the camp community as MyView. And so starting in 2023, we started to use that with camps, with campers. So when a camper comes in, they have an opportunity with a device. And for a lot of camps, that was the last time they touched their device, to go into this very child-friendly tools and talk about their strengths, talk about any worries they had about entering camp, any other anxieties, talk about what they were hoping was going to happen, and just all of these different expressions. And it creates a bridge, right? This very user-friendly tool creates a bridge in which we can understand their perspectives. We can give them a voice. We can empower them. We can engage them in a way in which we typically haven't been doing. And we learn some really incredible things about how children, for example, were concerned about meal times. They were concerned at bedtimes.
Yeah.
And wearing a director hat and having many conversations with directors over the years, not everything we learned was brand new, but it had a flavor, it had a nuance that we hadn't thought about before. And a lot of these things are actionable. And in the moment, data can come in from young people before they come into camp, or they're coming in, and you have an opportunity to say, I've learned more about this child's needs. I can share some information with the appropriate staff so we can provide better care. So ultimately, it's about providing high-level care to meet a young person's individual needs. And at the same time, increasing their voice, increasing their sense of being empowered and engaged. And, it's just incredible. And then this past summer in 2024, we also launched a staff version of the tool. And we're just now getting into the data. We're really excited about what we're going to learn. But, that I think is a cornerstone of addressing these needs that are coming up in camps and other programs in summer, is having a way to collect data in a way that young people will feel okay. They'll feel safe in providing that information. They'll feel like they're being heard. And that's going to allow us to provide, again, ultimately better care, better programs, better experiences. And I also think, what happens then? Well, we have parents and caregivers who are more satisfied and they feel like their child's needs have been met. Pretty powerful.
Hey, Barry, on the show, I'm always the non-doctor on the show, always. But I also come into this with a lot of, my work for 15 years has been about communication and how we communicate the value of camp and all of that stuff too. So I'm really interested when you talk about how we communicate to make kids feel safer. I'm interested in the research you did about parent communications. But you just said something that I couldn't figure out what it was. You said we're taking a first look at the data. So I assume that what you've got is an Excel sheet or a Google sheet with hundreds of rows and columns.
Yes.
What is your first step in that?
So, as any researcher will appreciate what I'm going to say next, you spend most of your time cleaning the data.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, looking through the data to get rid of responses that are erroneous, looking for trends in the data that suggest that maybe it wasn't an accurate or honest response. And so we do all of these different techniques just to get the data ready to analyze. And it is legitimately the most time-consuming aspect of a project.
And we should be specific. This is survey data.
This is survey data.
This is coming in through the app.
Yeah. So depending on how you collect data, what you do next looks and feels a little different. So we're talking about survey data when we're collecting stories through surveys. So not just, was it mixed? Were you getting some numbers and stories, quant and qual?
We have a little bit of qual, but the tool is more designed leaning towards quant.
And both need cleaning, by the way. With surveys, both of those kinds of data coming in, whether it's quant or qual, need cleaning. It's just different amounts and different kinds of cleaning depending on what kind of data you're collecting. Anyways, carry on, Barry. Tell us.
No, so Travis, we could spend hours and hours on the cleaning side and push one button to get the analysis and actually get the results. So that's the reality. That's actually one of the reasons why research projects can take so long, right?
Sure.
You have all this time to collect the data, and then there's this sort of quiet period.
Yeah.
And the collaborators or whoever's interested in what you did are sort of like, hey, what's going on? We're excited about the results. And that's that quiet period is when we have to make sense of the data.
That's almost the period too where you're like, don't talk to me. We talk about being immersed in the data because it's almost like learning a new language. Every time we do a project, it's like learning a new language with it until we feel like we can be fluent with what's there in the data. So there's a lot of learning what's there. It's about learning kind of the language, the themes, the trends, the nuances of what's there. So this immersed in the data part, I am very cone of silence. Like even my kids will be like, oh crap, I can see she's got a coding piece of software, and they just back out slowly. Don't say anything. Like I've got to concentrate.
That's so true.
So I don't want to assume that I know what cleaning the data means. Can you expand on that, please?
Sure. So let's think about how data collection effort might actually happen in the real world. So let's say I let 10 people test it at the beginning of the survey. Those 10 test responses I have to delete. Let's say another 10 people campers, for example, go into the survey, get immediately turned off. They do not want to answer it. They don't care about it, and they don't. Or they opt out because we have consent processes and every person has to consent. Maybe they don't, right? So for that reason, we might not have complete data. Or maybe they start to do it, but they get distracted, who knows, by their parents, by some other activity happening at camp, right? So we look at that and we say, okay, we've got some missing data, some non-responses. We have to make some decisions about that, about what gets included and why it doesn't. And we have criteria for that. So those are just some of the examples of how you can have this really big data set, but as you go through and you start to make some decisions. And then, I think I mentioned outliers, and outliers are responses that don't sort of fall within certain margins that we would expect responses to be. And those outliers, we don't necessarily always get rid of them, but it makes us stop and go, oh, let me take a look at the overall responses and see, is there evidence that maybe this person was just maybe not answering honestly? And sometimes they are honest. They just happen to think a little differently. Their perspective is different, but we have to really sort of be cautious with those. So those are just some of the examples, sort of what we have to do. And if you have 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000, or more responses, that process can take a little bit of time.
Because you go line by line, like you're going through it. Yeah, going it. Well, and I don't know if you've ever been that annoying person who's filled out a survey and like KKGGHIHI, that kind of stuff happens. But the problem with those is sometimes they'll answer out of 10 questions, they answer 2 like that, and everything else is useful. So then you have to make a decision. Were they throwing the whole survey?
That was my next question.
Yeah. So, I mean, or the other part is sometimes non-responses, or when people hit neutral, when they give you a neutral on those, and you think, what am I doing with this? Are they actually telling me that they are an average? They are rating all of these statements in a kind of in the middle kind of way, or are they trying to say, it doesn't apply, I don't care, I'm not going to bother? So there's those kinds of issues. The other one is this one. People don't always say what they mean, and they don't always mean what they say. And that shows up even in the quantitative data too, because then you're trying to figure out, for example, did this question get answers that actually answer this question? So let's say you ask somebody what their favorite food is, and everybody goes, I like drinking soda. And you're like, well, but that's drinking things. That's beverages. That's not food. But like everybody said it in the food question. Did I ask the food question wrong? So there's that, trying to weigh through some of that too. That happens sometimes when I write a test for my uni students, and like everybody except one or two gets question 7 wrong. I know I've written the question the wrong way, or I've put the answer in the wrong spot or something like that. And the 2 who got it right out of the class of 100, they were guessing anyways. And good luck to well done them. They hit the potluck this time. So that kind of stuff shows up. Normally you get that part sorted out in the test at the beginning, but those are the kinds of things that you got to look for and clean up.
And, one of the things we added as well were measures of some of the ideas that I suggested were true for the tool. Things like youth voice, youth engagement, youth support. And so we have ways to not only sort of say, we think they feel this way about using the tool, we can actually measure that. And we can have some evidence that, yes, they really did feel that way about entering responses into this tool.
The cool news with quant research too is that what Barry said is you get to push button, you get an answer. But developing the logic that goes behind the button that gets pushed, which is one of, I think, Ryan's strengths, one of your co-authors at times, there's a lot of work that goes, to me in quantitative research, a lot of the work is in the front end. You got to get it pretty tight and pretty polished before you let anybody else get their hands on it. Whereas qualitative research can be a little bit more open-ended, and then we tighten up and polish once we have the data, and we do it through analysis and then the presentation of findings. So different ways to get to different ends, but both highly rigorous and at times time-consuming.
And it's also important to know that for camps that say, "Oh, I know I've kind of heard about MyView and digital empathy, but I haven't gotten involved." It is possible to get involved, so they can reach out to the Alliance for Camp Health and express their interest. And yeah, we'd love to have more camps engaged. And that is sort of the vision for that work, is that it's going to continue to expand.
We'll get details from you, Barry, and put them in the show notes. So if somebody's listening, they can go look up and find ways to connect.
Did you know that ACA Illinois' primary work is getting young people to camp from communities that don't traditionally attend? This includes providing services to 9,000 kids and adults from low-income communities throughout the state of Illinois annually. ACA Illinois has deep roots in using camp as a way to create social change in local, state, and national communities, including creating equitable access for all children to attend camp. ACA Illinois loves to try new things and believes it's how we create the most dynamic impact for our campers, staff, and community. This is why ACA Illinois always jumps at the chance to collaborate with content experts and countless volunteers to develop new and innovative programming. Ready to help us achieve this mission? Join us at acail.org. Are you a camp professional looking for community? Are you a camp interested in accreditation but don't know where to start? Are you looking to grow your career? Are you looking for ways to give back? Reach out to us at info@acail.org and let's get you connected. Scheduling affects every camper and every staff member's summer. It's easy to make mistakes. It takes a ton of time. The bottom line, scheduling is hard. But it doesn't have to be. Let Camptivities help you create a balanced and engaging schedule without the mistakes and without those long days and late nights. Camptivities does it all. Auto scheduling, camper scheduling, group scheduling, elective scheduling, manual adjustments, over 60 different reports, tons of customizable settings, and so much more. Now is the time to find a better way to schedule this summer. And don't wait, next summer will be here before you know it. We'd love to show you the next big thing in camp. Visit camptivities.com to set up a time to chat. Let us help you get away from your desk and back out to camp.
I wanted to say, and I've told Barry this, and I've told Travis this, I'm a fairly new camp parent. Living in Australia, my kids really didn't get opportunity to do camp. And so my move back to Canada has meant they're off to camp, which, by the way, it is October and we're already discussing where they want to go next summer. So it's made an impact. I can't believe it. I'll be making a meal and my youngest will come in and go, I'm still weighing up this camp, that camp, or that camp. I was like, oh, I didn't realize you were deciding, but all right, cool. I'll listen. One of those camps started using something similar to, but has been set up differently to this idea of digital empathy and the MyView and collecting this information. And I want to say from a parent's point of view, and I know this isn't research based, but one, it gives me assurance if they're asking those questions, then they care about those things.
Yeah.
And two, when I'm writing down, here's the strategies of handling when my kids hit hard moments or have big feelings, I know that somewhere in their head that they'll probably scan that. It won't stick in anyone's brain. But if they run into that moment with that kid, they have a resource, like an immediate resource of this is what we do at home to take some space, calm ourselves, regulate, and get back on track. And that's so unique per child and what they're going through. And they ask those questions every summer. So as those things evolve and change and my children mature, I get to say something. The other part I love, I know it's totally confidential. I'm not embarrassing my kids standing in front of the camp counselor and all the other campers and parents. I'm saying what's real, what's important in a confidential way. So I can be actually more candid. I feel I can be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's such a clever way to do it.
Yeah, I think tools, that tool for sure, and, possibly other resources in the future are going to evolve so that we can get the best information we can, not just from parents, but also for those camp participants, whether they're campers or staff, so that we can meet their needs. And, that's what the camp community has always done.
Yes.
Always evolved. We've always
very
evolved
creative.
to better understand the needs of the people we're serving, the people we're employing, our volunteers, all of them, right? I mean, we've always done that and we'll continue to, right? And research is at the crux of that, being able to have good evidence to inform our practices.
Yeah. And I think it's almost like a camp value or camp mentality to be a creative, on the spot problem solver, to not have oodles of resources at hand often means you have to be more innovative with the limitations you have. And I think the other part is camp folks spend a lot of time practicing play. There's a certain amount of risk-taking and experimentation that comes with creativity and innovation that camp folks kind of have practice, or at the very least are, I don't know, comfortable in that space of like, well, this sounds like a crazy idea. I think it might work. Let's try. And then there's this sort of, so that's, I mean, the good news is that's where the research point comes in, is where we go, is it really working? Is it effective? Let us actually line up all the evidence that says yes or no, or that was a lucky one off. Maybe don't do that one again. So, that's kind of a cool part of it. Travis, I saw you looking like you wanted to ask or say a thing.
Well, I do. I want to pick up on what you said, Mandi, about filling out the forms. So the MyView app, is that information, like, is what's gathered there just data, or is that shared with the camp? Like, does camp also learn about the kids
So the camp
as well as the researchers?
Yeah, the camp gets the data first.
Okay.
And then we get data de-identified. And that's according to the research
gotcha.
that we follow, right?
Oh, yep,
So,
perfect.
yeah, so the camp gets it.
So
And they
to be clear,
Yeah.
de-identified means that they've pulled out any indicators that somebody could look at it and puzzle out, oh, this is Travis's grandson who went to this camp.
That is exactly correct. Yes, that's right. But the camp gets that information so that they can make some actionable decisions on their end if they would like to, right?
Right.
So they get it first, and then we are patient as researchers, and we wait till the end of the summer.
Sure.
Or we impatiently wait because we get pretty excited. When we know a good lot of data is coming at us, man, I get itchy. I get a little, oh, it's coming. Let's get it. It's a little Christmas.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say is that the MyView part, to me, the cherry on top is that you're capturing youth voice. So parents, how I see what's going on for my kids and how my kids see what's going on for them is different. And ultimately, I would wish for providers, care and camp providers, to provide that assistance and support in the way that my children want. And giving them agency, putting the power back with, like you said, it's empowering, putting the power back with the kid to say, this is when I have these problems, this is what I want for help. So to me, that's the cherry on top. I think it's helpful to get a guardian or parent point of view. Often with a little life experience, we see things differently. We can talk to other adults in a way that's a little bit more like advanced or coded. But ultimately, and I think of my daughter here, she's 13, she's hitting that moment where saying what I want for me is really, really important and something I desperately want to support, because I want her to be able to call the shots about her care and how people treat her. And so that's maybe the missing piece that I haven't encountered other than knowing Barry's research. I would be excited to see. It's like, how would my kids say, there's a good chance my youngest would just be like, get me a popsicle. We'll be... get me a freezy, I'll be fine. But where my daughter might say something about, like, I just need some space to regroup and I need regular quiet time. She's our introvert. I need some time with books, which, when I was a camper, there were no books. You didn't sit around and read books. That wasn't actually a thing that was well supported. Introverts did not have space at camp. But camps are evolving. They're recognizing that's a really important piece of the puzzle for a lot of kids.
Well, exactly. And so when I was talking about MyView tool and digital empathy a few moments ago, I did sort of focus on what were my worries about camp or anxieties. And I mentioned strengths. They talk about, what am I good at? What am I hopeful for in this experience? And so with that information, right, leaders, staff can make some real decisions around, how do I engage this camper in a way that's going to help them feel more safe, that's going to help them feel more connected, help them feel like they belong, right? So it's not just about, we want to react to some of these concerns. It's also, how do we build on their strengths? I mean, the tool is completely wrapped in a positive youth development perspective in that way. We're trying to mobilize supports and opportunities that acknowledge a young person's strengths and build on that strength. And again, just can't say enough about it.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, we're going to change gears anyways, because there's so much to cover with you. No, really?
I want to pick up on one more thing.
Go.
And it's not about research methods. It was something that you said, Mandi, about filling out the form and how your kids change over time. So this is a problem that camp has with parents, or maybe more specific, camps have with parents have with camps. But parents do not understand why they have to fill this information out year over year. And you saying the story is my kids change. Like, I wish
Yeah.
camps would tell that story more, how this impacts us and how we're going to use this information. And we're going to put it side by side with how that kid answers as well.
Yeah.
I don't
And
think we
I
can
think
do that
it's
very well.
possible. I think camp gives an opportunity for kids to change. Like, I think we know that camp's such a transformative experience in situ, in the moment. Like, we watch these kids evolve from day one until the day they leave, which is kind of amazing. But I think when we get into our everyday lives, we can kind of, pigeonhole folks and and then even possibly hold people to their pigeonholes. So as an example, calling Tilly, that's my daughter, an introvert, which she will claim fairly easily, that she may not appreciate me constantly saying that's your identity or that's the characteristics of your identity, because she may want to be other things. What camp seems to recognize is, because we see so much other things, that's going to happen naturally. I mean, that's just one feature. We're also talking about a spectrum of behaviors and neurodiversity. We're talking about a spectrum of physical, mental health stuff. Stuff changes. People's lives change. So camps, I think, get it intrinsically because they get to witness such an amount of transformation. But parents and siblings can often lose track of the fact that the people that are closest in their lives are in fact changing quite a bit. We just don't necessarily see it. And hence why we need more paperwork, please.
Well, I've had that same experience, Travis, with parents who aren't acknowledging and maybe don't understand why we can't need certain information. And Mandi, all your thinking about those change processes are right on. I think it creates an opportunity, and we've seen some directors do this, in which they're communicating at some key areas at some pivotal times during the lead into summer or coming out of summer. And they're helping parents to sort of think about some things like, we know this is true about your child. Your child's going to be feeling this and thinking this because, or many parents tell us this about their kids, or many kids tell us, right? There's a lot of framing we can use to sort of introduce some ideas. Like, we know that your child has changed since last year. They've had some significant life events. They've had some successes. They may have had some challenges, right? And so it's these communication pieces. And you talked about communication earlier. It's so important, right? And I do think that the most successful directors are those that either are doing that messaging or they're recognizing that, hey, I could be doing some more messaging with parents,
100%.
right? To really prepare them for the registration process, prepare them for all the things that camp's going to ask, and ultimately to help parents prepare their kids for success, right? It's that partnership.
Yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't agree more. Those are huge pieces. We've seen the camp where our kids go or went. One of them's 15, one's 20. So the 20-year-old has aged out of being on staff, but the 15-year-old still attending. And the directors have been really effective in helping to frame change and frame what we might see. And of course, from a camp researcher, camp perspective, I recognize that, but I love it that they're telling me, right?
Yeah.
Because we can all be reminded of those things. I think it's one of those important communication skills that comes with our field. So
we're in a very weird business. I mean, any other business providers, whether that's a product or a service, generally sells their thing directly to the consumer. And we don't. We sell it to this other person who never shows up. I mean, yeah, they might walk on site in the first day. Sometimes in one of the cases with ours, I put them on a bus. I don't even get out to site most summers. So
and increasingly so coming out of the pandemic, where camps have learned that the best check-in and check-out processes are the ones in which parents are involved as minimally as possible.
Yeah, isn't that incredible? And just as a parent, I appreciate that too, because this is my opportunity to catch up on all that lost work, sleep, and hopefully a little relaxation. So take them. We're good. I'm teasing there, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're in a really weird business where the purchaser and the person who has to evaluate the value for money and whether or not they got their goods, if they're satisfied, is actually not the consumer or the participant. And parents have to make the judgment if they're going to spend that money again based on what their kids tell them happened at camp, which, depending on the child and their age, is a wonky interpretation of whatever. If it was my son's, for example, it's whatever happened in the last 20 minutes is the most prevalent, significant thing in his mind. He's so present-minded. He's so in the moment that whatever happened at the beginning of the week. Did you make friends? Yeah. What are their names? I don't know. Like that is a regular conversation at our
Sure.
house. Kids, apparently names are not important for friendships when you're 9. So, this is what the buyer has in terms of information to make a judgment on. It makes good business sense for camps to be communicating, and not just, like you said, communicating, but it's a service industry. So building relationships and generating social capital and being really on it. And if camp hasn't thought about that in a complex, dynamic way, they're missing a really important part of the business exchange as well, not just the potential for, benefit and growth. So
Yeah, we've
tricky
worked,
one.
one of my research partners, Dr. Ryan Gagnon, and I have done a lot of work with camps around parent satisfaction, around parent communication, around outcomes parents associate with their child attending camp. And that work has evolved with some camps over multiple years. And you can see the camps refining how they're asking questions to better understand parents' needs, parent preferences, right? And so if you're a listener and you haven't really thought about how you could collect some really good data from parents, you can, and it can really help drive some improvements in what you're providing.
Well, I'm going to switch us gears now, finally. Sorry, Travis.
Definitely. Please do. Switch gears.
It's so exciting to
10
talk
minutes
to
later.
you. And as we warned Barry before we started, I was like, we're going to get so far off track because we're going to be having a good time. So this is a good sign that we're having a very good time. I wanted to talk to you about the Journal of Youth Development. It's another hat that you wear. It's a significant one from my point of view. We've mentioned it on the podcast many times. And for me, it's not just that there's good work being published there and there's good work being published there. It's open access. And that's one of the big issues, that academic work is often behind paywalls, that you don't get access to it unless you belong to an organization like a university who pays for the subscriptions. But Journal of Youth Development is open access. That means you can Google it and get the articles. You can read it straight away. Right. Barry, tell us about your role there. What does the journal do? What is it trying to achieve?
So the Journal of Youth Development, and it was started a number of years ago. It is co-sponsored by the National Association of Extension 4-H Youth Development Professionals, that's NAE 4-HYDP, and the National After School Association, NAA. So co-sponsored by those organizations. Right now, it's published through Clemson University. As you mentioned, it's an academic journal. It is peer-reviewed. It is open source, so it's not behind a paywall. Authors do not have to submit, don't have to pay a fee in order to get their article published. And that double-blind peer review process has the academic rigor that we expect to see in an academic journal. Open access means people have not just at ease of submitting articles, but also the ease of getting their work published. But the journal itself focuses on bridging youth development, research, and practice. We often see articles coming from the out-of-school time space, sometimes from other settings. So there's a lot of research being done and published in the journal from the camp community, from the after-school community, other community-based programs. My key role as the editor-in-chief is to work with our associate editors, to work with our authors and our reviewers to produce high-quality articles and high-quality issues. And we publish 4 issues a year. There are different sections. Some are more research or evaluation facing sections that you can, and I'll say section, I mean category and emphasis area. So you can go to the website, you can learn about that category and say, oh, I see the work that I'm doing sitting there. There are some other categories, other sections that focus on programs and practices, right? So maybe you don't collect data, you're not a researcher, you're a practitioner, but you've tried an effective approach, an effective intervention. You develop a new program, and you really think that what you've learned can be a model for other people doing youth development work. So that's an opportunity for you. And one of the exciting things is that we're going to be expanding those categories to provide more opportunities for practitioners to have a voice and what that might look like. We're thinking about how we can bring youth voice into the journal too. So it's just a lot of exciting things happen. So I would encourage everyone to register with the journal so you can get announcements, to check us out on social media. You can follow us through Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. And so again, announcements will come about issues, about other things happening with the journal. So those are ways to connect. But that's been a really important element of my work in supporting that youth development bridge from research to practice. and also supporting authors in being successful in publishing the work that gets them excited.
Look, I came across the Journal of Youth Development because I put a paper in because you guys were doing a special issue on camp research. And look, people doing camp research are not as many as, for example, people doing research in cancer for maybe obvious reasons, but medical research is pretty prolific. So the opportunity to actually be in a collection with other camp researchers, I'm going to go officially on record saying it was one of the best publishing experiences I've ever had as an author, because there's a genuine desire to get good information in the hands of people who can use it and will use it. So there was a very lovely nod towards the theoretical. There was a emphasis and focus on, and how can we use this in the everyday? Tell us how we can take this forward. And the special issue editor was Deb Bieleszki, which is a familiar name in the camp research. And she did such a phenomenal job of really supporting. And I think that's something, like you said, the camp researchers are a group of that are flourishing, because I think we're very community minded and we're nice to each other. We want to see this work happen and go well.
And I would say that the Journal of Youth Development is a very high-touch journal when it comes to supporting the needs of authors, communicating quickly, communicating directly, hearing what their concerns are, whether it's what's the status of my article, or how do I address some of these formatting requirements, or is my article a good fit? And is there anything I can do to improve the fit, right? We're really excited about the role that JYD plays in supporting the needs of camp researchers and camp practitioners. And like you said, whether it's that special issue, or honestly, I regularly pull down the top 5, top 10, top 15 most accessed articles, the ones that people are really paying attention to and are clicking on. Camp shows up in a number of those. So yes, we have the special issue, and we've had some sort of targeted focus on the camp community. There's a lot of research getting published within the Journal of Youth Development related to camp. So again, if people haven't checked it out, you can go there, you can do keyword searches and find, I think, a lot of things that are going to interest you.
Absolutely. Well, it's time for us to wrap up. Even though I want to keep going for hours, I know that our editors would hate me to do that, because they'd have to piece it all together to keep it in time. So we're going to wrap it up with one more question, Barry.
Okay.
Tell us what part of camp is not getting enough research right now.
I'm glad you asked the question, because I love to think about that. And so if my grad students were with me, they would laugh, because I always talk about what's the gap. Try to figure out what the gap is, try to fill the gap. Well, for one thing, when I think about that question, I always think about something I said earlier. What are the pain points? What questions do practitioners need us to answer? So for some of the answer to that question, I don't know it, because I don't know what they experienced this past summer. I don't know yet, right? But I want them to tell me, or tell somebody. So for one, I think it's kind of emergent. There's that recognition that we've got to be responsive to what's happening in the field. So that's one sort of piece. There's some other things, though, about how camp impacts may be sustained over time, what we can do. We touched on this earlier. I just want to come back to it to say, let's not just focus on the immediate experience. And that's not minimizing. I've done a lot of qualitative work on the immediate experience. And we do have to understand that in the moment, but we also have to be able to articulate and have evidence for how this amazing transformative experience helps young people be successful over time. That's going to really engage the kind of policy and resources that I think will really, not just help the camp community be sustained, but really help us continue to thrive. So I'd love to see those kind of questions being addressed and those longer term impacts being teased out. I also think there's issues around the fact that not everyone is a part of the camp community. Not everybody sees themselves. We know this. We have to continue to give that topic serious attention, acknowledging that we don't have everybody engaged, that there are some communities that may not have camp as a part of their history, that may not see camp as a part of their future. And we have to understand those perspectives. And so, it's in that regard, yes, we've done some work in that space, but we have to continue to be really serious about understanding that. So continue to diversify, not just who's participating, but who's leading, right? At all levels. We want to continue to see that. I think I mentioned policy earlier. I've got one of my graduate students now, Alex Scrocky, who's really interested in policy. And I think there's big gaps in how policy issues have impacted the camp community,
Mhm.
what's happened historically around those issues, like how did legislation get passed or
Yeah.
not? And what do we know about that? And in the future, what resources would help support the camp community in that area? So we've got these sort of bigger systems questions that I would like to see and more work done in those spaces. I've got another student, I can't help but talk about their great work, who's also trying to understand, goes back to our conversation about transitions, who's really looking at high quality counselor and training programs.
Mm.
Oh, cool.
And if you look at the research, very few studies, and her name's Leslie
Yeah.
Heffington, by the way. Leslie Heffington is doing that work. Very few studies are really looked at that topic. And so
Yep.
again, I think we've got to pay attention to what the gaps are. We've got to be assertive in addressing those gaps and also be really aware that what's happening in the field may be something else we've never thought of. And I think ultimately too, this trend towards care, this trend towards voice, belonging, all of these terms are a part of the camp community. But depending upon what decade we might be talking about, maybe those terms got different levels of attention. And the fact that we're putting even more attention on them now is so appropriate, because that's the kind of thinking that's going to help young people make it through some of these challenges, help our young adults make it through some of those challenges, are things like support and care and belonging and community. So that a lot of that focus, whether we're talking about the Campwell Project, whether we're talking about MyView project, right? A lot of work is being done in the space, and I think that's going to have to continue. So I could keep going, Mandi. I know you don't want me to do that. But those are some of the things that come to mind. And I would say, I think about the University of Utah and the tremendous research team there. I think about the ACA Research Forum, the book of abstracts that's published every year from the Research Forum. You can go to the website, American Camp Association's website, and see all of those. And you can say, oh my gosh, let me just dabble in this, and I can understand what some of these contemporary issues are. That's a way, right, to put your finger on the pulse. On the camp healthcare side, connecting with the Alliance for Camp Health's Compass Point journal. And by the way, it's not just for camp healthcare providers. Every single director I've ever given it to said, I had no idea that the stuff in here is going to help me as a director. And honestly, one of the things, if I could go back in time to when I was directing, that I would have done differently would have been being aware of resources like that and is available to different levels of my staff based upon their role. But anyway, those are just some of the things that we can look to into thinking about what's the contemporary research, what do we need to be thinking about, who's doing that work, right?
Yeah.
Who should we be paying attention to, reaching out to, collaborating with, right? So
that's super cool. Well, go ahead, Travis.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, what our usual last question is, who else should we talk to? But you've given us some great names, so that's
really of course you gave me the questions at a time. I couldn't think of the answer, and honestly, my response was going to be, go to that book of abstracts and see who's doing the innovative work.
Yeah,
and it could be the innovative method, it could be the innovative conceptual frame, innovative population. That's what I would do. I would go hunting, but So hopefully I gave you what you were hoping for.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got 100%. Nuggets?
Yes, many and so much more. In fact, I've been flagging them as we go along to make it easy to add them into the show notes. For people who are listening, they should be able to access those show notes, and that will have information about contacts and a number of the people, places, and things that Barry actually talked about today. But how do we get a hold of you, Barry? If somebody wants to talk to you, how do they reach out to you?
So I'm very responsive via email. The best way is just to email me at bgarst, BGARST, at Clemson, CLEMSON.edu. And I'd love to connect with people, whether you're doing the camp work or doing camp research or evaluation, or you're interested in getting more involved or learning more. I love to mentor young researchers. I love to hear from practitioners what their experiences are, what their challenges are, and ultimately it's like, what questions should camp research be exploring? And we have got to hear from the field, right? I get out in the field as much as I can.
Yes, you do.
Camp Association visitor. I visit other camps at times, but it's not the same as being embedded in the experience. So we've got to hear from the field. So I hope we can continue to make those bridges, right, between research and practice, right? It's got to happen on both sides. So Anyway, love for folks to reach out to me. Please do.
Thanks so much for being in the pudding, Barry. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for the invitation.
And if you didn't know, now you know, Camp Pros.